Let's analyze the latest tactical data coming in. In record time, what we once categorized as secondary support assets are now executing the absolute deadliest missions along the zero line in Ukraine. To an untrained eye, this looks like standard adaptation in a theater where both forces fight to survive under hostile drone-choked skies and on terrain saturated with mines. But the critical intelligence here is that Kyiv is no longer deploying these unmanned ground vehicles in isolated, scattered roles. We are seeing them deploy with high frequency, covering diverse mission profiles in sector hotspots where assault troops once had to bear the brutal brunt alone. When deployment reaches this threshold, we are no longer talking about experimental tech or isolated tactical tests. It signals a fundamental shift in how Kyiv conducts ground operations, presenting a deadly tactical evolution that Russian forces will find increasingly difficult to counter in the long run. So, how exactly is the Ukrainian military operationalizing these robots? And why does this mark one of the most significant tactical shifts of the entire conflict? Let us analyze the raw data together here at Military Force. March 2026 was the flashpoint when these robotic assets transitioned from niche frontline experiments into fully integrated, lethal combat capabilities. Confirmed reports from Ukraine's defense ministry show their forces executed over 9,000 robotic missions in March alone, pushing the year-to-date total to nearly 24,500 operations by early April. As military analysts, we know operational evolution is not measured by mere invention. It is proven by sheer repetition, tactical routine, and industrial scale. Executing thousands of missions in 1 month proves this technology is no longer an experimental prototype. It is now standard operational doctrine. And the intelligence curve behind these figures is highly revealing. Back in November 2025, they logged just 2,900 robotic missions. By March 2026, that metric surged past 9,000. This was no localized emergency spike or a single flash in the pan. It indicates a systematic, compounding escalation, proving that brigade commanders on the ground are seeing high utility and demanding more volume. In high-intensity warfare, this trajectory means an asset has graduated from field-level improvisation to formal strategic integration. The rapid proliferation across combat units makes this shift even more undeniable. In November 2025, 67 tactical units deployed these systems. By March 2026, that jumped to 167. This integration swept across diverse disciplines, including medical evacuation, heavy assault, logistics, and frontline paratroopers. This is critical because it proves these robots are not restricted to niche, specialized operations. They are being systematically absorbed across the entire force structure, a far truer indicator of doctrinal evolution than a simple mission tally. Crucially, the Ukrainian General Staff is not just counting physical hulls. They are weaponizing data, using their Delta integration network to coordinate missions, log battle diagnostics, and evaluate operational efficiency. This level of integration is vastly superior to simple procurement. It reveals a highly structured military cycle of planning, violent execution, data harvesting, and rapid optimization. For a nation locked in a brutal war of attrition against a larger adversary, this evolution is strategic. Automated combat units are scaling up systematically. They are now organized and massed to support the broader strategic objective. The key takeaway is not the mechanical hardware itself, but the doctrinal pattern behind it. Ukraine is proving to us that ground robotics can be standardized and scaled in total war. With operations escalating at this rate, the core question is no longer about raw inventory. The real question is what high-risk tasks these machines are taking off human shoulders. The initial, critical impact of these unmanned ground platforms was not lethal firepower. It was the vital, brutal task of moving combat supplies through areas where any movement meant death. With hostile drones choking the skies, even routine supply runs to the trench line became as suicidal as direct assault operations. Rations, water, ammunition, and battery packs. Our medics still had to get critical kits to forward trenches, but every single supply route was zeroed in by enemy eyes. That broke our logistics wide open. Resupply runs aren't just support missions anymore. Out here, every run is a high-stakes survival gamble. In this brutal kill zone, a machine can take the first hit instead of a soldier. That is why ground robots found their earliest mission in critical logistics. This tactical pivot gave our ground robots real, life-saving value during their initial combat trials. They pulled our troops out of the crosshairs during the most repetitive, high-risk runs near the zero line. Rather than marching troops down supply routes tracked by Russian drones, our frontline units are sending robotic platforms forward with vital gear. Losing a steel platform hurts, but it does not compare to losing our trained, irreplaceable boots on the ground. In bloodied sectors like Pokrovsk, where enemy pressure is relentless and drone swarms cloud the sky, these robots keep our frontline outposts from collapsing. This is no tech demo or battlefield experiment. We deploy them because our troops need ammo and rations, and standard transport is simply too bloody to maintain. Logistics is the backbone of this robotic revolution. It's not just about keeping soldiers alive, it's about maintaining operational momentum. Forward squads cannot hold territory if their supply lines collapse. Even in a quiet sector, one successful delivery by a robot can buy a dug-in squad another 24 hours. This same brutal logic applies to emergency casualty evacuation. Here, the pressure on rescue teams is immense. A wounded soldier bleeding out at the zero line faces far more than shock. He is fighting the clock, brutal terrain, and constant thermal surveillance from hostile skies. Any human rescue team we send becomes an instant target. That is why casualty evacuation is the ultimate mission for ground robots. A rugged robotic platform can crawl directly into the kill zone, drag a wounded soldier out of the hot zone, and slash the number of rescue troops we expose to fire. They cannot replace a combat medic, nor can they cure the headaches of heavy mud and cratered roads. But they shave off the deadliest leg of the evacuation route. On the front, that sliver of time saves lives. These urgent demands for logistics and evacuation are why Ukraine prioritized ground robots on the modern battlefield. Both tasks are relentless. Both burn through precious combat strength daily. And both bleed our forces even when the lines are officially quiet. Keeping supply lines open and retrieving our wounded does more than streamline operations. It preserves our fighting strength for the long haul. That is crucial for Ukraine, because a war of attrition grinds down armies not just in major breakthroughs, but through the slow erosion of routine duties. This robotic shift isn't about sci-fi imagery or high-tech flash. It's the cold math of tactical survival in a theater where if you are seen, you are dead. Once a platform proves it can keep ammunition flowing and drag our wounded out under fire, its operational role will only expand. Any tech that secures our support lines will inevitably be pushed right up to the edge of direct contact. That tactical reality gives our field commanders every reason to scale up operations step by step. Operational trust is built on solving everyday tactical nightmares, not on chasing a single highly dramatic headline. After proving their mettle in supply and evacuation, Ukraine's ground robots began executing far more lethal missions, providing direct combat support right at the edge. This marks an escalating shift in doctrine. These systems are no longer just pack mules or robotic ambulances pulling our guys out of the fire. They are now hunting, pushing directly toward enemy trenches. Reports confirm our forces have structured specialized robotic units for assault, defense, mining, and clearing operations, along with logistics and rescue. This diverse roster signals a massive evolution in military command thinking. Ground machines are no longer treated as mere utility carts. They are integrated assets designed to help our squads reach, suppress, and disrupt enemy positions without exposing our troops to direct, lethal fire. This shift solves a brutal, everyday frontline problem. The initial push toward an enemy trench or hardened bunker is always the deadliest moment for our infantry. Every soldier knows the meat grinder of marching blind into a hot zone just to find the enemy. But now, unmanned ground vehicles take that lethal initial risk. We send them forward via remote control to draw enemy fire, forcing hostile defenders to reveal their exact positions before we commit our men. That completely flips the casualty math. Flesh and blood no longer have to spearhead every deadly breach. Instead, a drone rolls in, takes the hits, and feeds live intel back so we can see if the bunker is hot. In a theater ruled by instant surveillance and precision strikes, this tactical order saves lives. We are seeing a massive variety of these robotic systems deployed right now. Some heavy platforms are rigged with machine guns to lay down suppressive fire. Other units carry heavy anti-tank mines or demolition charges, designed to blast enemy dugouts without risking a human assault team. Recent battlefield footage proves exactly how this works. During a recent Ukrainian assault, a ground drone hauled 12 anti-tank mines over 20 kilometers, dropping them directly into a ruined stronghold where enemy troops were dug in. The critical takeaway here isn't just the massive explosion. It is the fact that an unmanned system can navigate a hostile route, approach a hidden target, and deliver devastating firepower without our troops having to cross that same deadly kill zone. This is no longer just combat support. This is a frontline breaching asset. This separates these drones from standard armored vehicles. A traditional tank is built around keeping a crew alive, heavy armor, and high mobility. A robotic platform plays by different rules. It can crawl through brush, wait in ambush for hours, and execute suicide runs that no commander would ever order a human crew to make. Intelligence indicates the Kartia Brigade recently carried out a remote-controlled ground offensive, deploying machine gun-armed vehicles alongside rapid mine-laying and clearing systems. This proves our Ukrainian allies aren't just strapping guns onto tiny platforms. They are actively integrating multiple robotic capabilities into synchronized combat operations. In modern war, the advantage goes to whoever keeps their heads down during initial contact while still applying brutal pressure. This hands tactical commanders critical options during those first chaotic seconds of contact, when mistakes usually get our troops killed before they can even react. Now, let's be clear, drones aren't replacing infantry, and close combat isn't dead. What they do change is who absorbs that initial wave of lethal fire when breaching an enemy position. This is a massive tactical shift. Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicles are no longer restricted to logistics, medical evacuations, or basic infantry support. They are stepping into crisis-level operations, outside active combat, a shift that reveals everything about the changing face of modern conflict. When a drone proves it can brave the kill zone instead of a human, we start asking much bigger questions. We're looking at where these systems can save lives long after the artillery barrages have stopped. That is why the firefighting robot deployed in Kramatorsk is so critical. Reports from the Kyiv Independent confirm our units deployed a Zem ground drone to suppress fires in civilian sectors following a heavy Russian strike. They made that call specifically after discovering highly explosive gas canisters at the site. This wasn't a mere tech demo. It proved that frontline robotics are rapidly evolving to preserve life inside a highly kinetic war zone. The implications of this mission stretch far beyond a single fire in one city. It proves that any environment deemed too lethal for human boots is now the perfect operational space for a ground drone. In a war of heavy shelling and drone strikes, shattered infrastructure, and constant urban bombardment, these lethal zones are everywhere. It's our daily reality. A robot deployed in these areas isn't there to transport ammo or clear a trench line. It must enter zones choked with extreme heat, falling debris, explosions, and toxic smoke, where follow-up strikes threaten our search and rescue teams. That changes the entire utility of the platform. We no longer judge these machines solely by their ability to kill. They are now vital emergency rescue assets, opening up a massive new tactical horizon. Deploying for search and rescue, combat engineering, mine clearance, and operating in hot zones where secondary strikes pose lethal threats. Yet, the core tactical logic remains exactly the same. Send the machine in first to absorb the initial danger, letting troops advance only when the threat level is controlled. Make no mistake, modern combat is no longer just about trench assaults and massive artillery duels. It is defined by the brutal aftermath of strikes, when troops and civilians and rescue crews must operate inside ruined cities under constant incoming fire. A ground bot capable of surviving this chaos is not just hardware, it is a vital pillar of operational survival. That is the strategic driver behind Ukraine's massive push for unmanned systems. Kyiv is no longer treating these ground systems as niche battlefield tools. Instead, commanders are scaling them into multi-role combat assets engineered to sustain troop survival across multiple layers of conflict. This spans the zero line, urban disaster zones, and critical efforts to maintain local infrastructure after heavy bombardment. Looking at the facts, The integration of unmanned systems into rescue operations is no sideshow. It proves that the Ukrainian military is adapting heavy tech to the brutal reality of attrition warfare. It indicates they are leveraging automation to protect first responder networks in cities constantly exposed to sudden missile strikes. When unmanned systems take over logistics, tactical support, and casualty evacuation, we are past the point of testing toys. The real question you and I must ask is why Kyiv feels this extreme urgency today. What unseen battlefield pressures are forcing this escalation? The answer is clear. Ukraine's rapid embrace of ground bots is directly linked to a severe, escalating manpower crisis. After years of brutal combat, attrition inside the armed forces is no longer just measured by casualty counts. It is seen in severe combat fatigue, mobilization failures, and the struggle to maintain unit readiness on the front. Field intelligence reveals massive desertion rates and widespread draft evasion, with hundreds of thousands fleeing active duty and millions dodging conscription. These severe numbers signal a deep structural collapse, not some temporary setback. They prove that Kyiv is desperately trying to wage a war of attrition while guarding a dwindling supply of elite soldiers. Under these harsh conditions, every single tactical deployment and risk calculation carries immense weight. Human lives are no longer treated as disposable assets. Every soldier must be shielded and preserved at all costs. This is precisely where ground bots transcend their technical specs and gain critical strategic value. These rugged platforms are specifically deployed to execute high-risk operations that would normally result in heavy human casualties. They haul critical munitions, clear dangerous choke points, and eliminate the need to put boots on the ground under enemy surveillance. Let's be clear. Autonomous hardware does not replace tactical leadership or human instinct. The main takeaway is that steel can bleed instead of flesh, absorbing the lethal threats that once killed our soldiers. Sending a robot into the breach first shifts the deadly burden of uncertainty away from the squad. That tactical adjustment may seem minor in a single engagement, but scaled across thousands of sorties, it dramatically reduces the steep cost of keeping an army combat effective. Rather than burning through elite troops on basic logistics, commanders can preserve them for high-value assault operations. This preservation effect is decisive in a war of attrition, where combat power is depleted by minor daily friction, not just massive offensives. Constant resupply runs, casualty evacuations, and routine patrols drain precious manpower, even during a lull in the fighting. A system that minimizes exposure during these mundane tasks actively halts the bleeding of personnel over long campaigns. This gives headquarters the breathing room to rotate frontline units and systematically manage combat fatigue. It preserves critical unit cohesion, which is the absolute backbone of effective tactical coordination. Against a numerically superior adversary, this capability carries immense strategic weight. It explains why ground systems are no longer treated as field experiments, but as a critical doctrine to sustain long-term combat operations. In the end, this massive technological shift is not about flashy gear. You and I are watching a desperate fight to protect the very human foundation of their military. When a new weapon system successfully cuts casualties and keeps troops alive, scaling up production becomes an absolute operational necessity. The headline-grabbing feature of an unmanned vehicle is its raw firepower, but the real tactical payoff lies in the lives it saves. Kyiv does not have endless waves of conscripts to throw into battle. Every asset that shields their troops from direct fire is critical. In this meat grinder, a combat robot is not just some tool hauling gear into danger. It is a critical buffer keeping human soldiers out of high-threat tasks. These lethal, repetitive missions are perfect for machines, rewriting battlefield doctrine. We cannot measure their worth solely by enemy targets destroyed, but by the friendly blood they prevent from being spilled. When a drone handles ammunition resupply or evacuates the wounded under fire, or scouts lethal enemy tree lines, far fewer flesh and blood soldiers have to absorb that direct danger. In an attritional war, this is vital. Battlefield losses are not just coffins shipped home. They are measured in shattered bodies and psychological exhaustion. It is the veteran combat leaders who break under constant stress. This is where robotic systems dictate the endurance of the force. They shield frontline infantry strength, absorbing the grueling tasks that otherwise grind human units down to nothing. These platforms give field commanders critical breathing room to manage thinning lines. Any unit that can avoid risking troops on routine patrols preserves its combat experience and cohesion. That keeps them combat ready. It does not make for flashy combat footage, but it wins wars. In this brutal war of attrition, even small drops in daily casualty rates compound into massive combat reserves after months of relentless grinding. That gives commanders the tactical flexibility to rotate battered troops and protect elite specialists whose combat skills cannot be easily replaced as Russian pressure surges. Ground robots will not solve this crisis alone. What they do is buy Kiev precious time. They multiply the reach of exhausted squads, lighten the physical burden, and hold critical defensive positions with far fewer casualties. That is why their ultimate value far exceeds mounted weapons. They are transforming into essential force preservation systems, acting as shields on this lethal battlefield. For Ukraine, keeping veterans alive is the difference between defending the line tomorrow or watching the entire front collapse under pressure. Right across the front, we are not witnessing the total end of infantry combat in this war, but rather a hard shift of high-risk combat tasks onto steel and silicon. This transition is rewriting how modern armies fight attritional campaigns. These remote systems are no longer limited to niche, isolated operations. They are now integrated into a comprehensive system to keep trenches supplied, maintaining constant combat pressure, where sending humans is a death sentence. If this doctrine takes hold, Russia's vast numerical superiority faces a major threat, not from one massive breakthrough, but through a relentless, agonizing grind where Ukraine steadily bleeds the enemy while shielding its own troops. In this high-tech theater, Ukraine is doing more than deploying new hardware. It is actively rewriting the entire playbook for how ground forces fight under total, inescapable drone surveillance. If this tactical breakdown gave you a clearer perspective, subscribe to Military Force right now for realistic, ground-level analysis of modern weapons and global strategy. We are here to report reality, not hype up war, because every artillery shell fired represents a brutal human cost. Stay tuned to Military Force for sharp, unvarnished intel from the front lines and real respect for peace.